The war had burned for centuries across the stars. Entire worlds had turned into dust. Cities once filled with life had become silent craters, their skies choked with the smoke of alien weapons. Fleets of steel and fire clashed again and again, yet no side could claim victory. Every empire believed itself destined to rule the galaxy, and so every empire refused to stop. The Galactic Council was desperate. They had gathered in the center of neutral space, inside a vast chamber that floated above a blue-white star. Representatives from 100 species filled the hall. Some were covered in scales, others in iron armor, some glowing with energy that barely resembled flesh. All had the same purpose, to decide the fate of the war. But among them there was one figure who did not belong. He was a human. He sat at the far end of the chamber, quiet and still. His uniform was simple compared to the grand robes and armor of the alien leaders. No glowing crown, no heavy weapon strapped to his back, no swarm of guards standing behind him. Just a man with pale skin, calm eyes, and a steady breath. The council had allowed him to be there only as an observer. The word had been repeated many times, as if to remind both him and the others. He was not to interfere, not to speak, not to guide. His task was only to watch and record. The human had agreed, or at least he had nodded. Still, his presence was a question that no one dared to answer. Why send a human? The warlords laughed behind closed doors. Humanity was young. Its colonies reached only a small corner of the galaxy. Its fleets were smaller than the armadas of ancient empires. Its weapons were decades behind the strongest powers. To the older races, humans were insignificant. And yet here one sat in the most powerful chamber in the universe. The green-scaled governor of the Seracs hissed across the room, his golden eyes narrowing at the human. Is he a decoration? A symbol? A spy? The red-armored warlord of the Drakith sneered, his metallic voice shaking the chamber. A fragile creature. His bones would break under a single strike. Why waste a chair on him? No one answered. The human did not respond. He kept his hands folded on the table, his eyes moving slowly from one alien to the next. His silence made the others uneasy. As the council meeting began, voices rose in anger. One empire demanded the destruction of another. Another shouted for revenge after the loss of their colonies. Every demand was louder than the last, every threat sharper, every word carrying centuries of hate. Through it all, the human sat quietly. Hours passed. The debates grew into screams. The chamber shook with the force of fists slamming onto tables, weapons flashing in warning, and ancient grudges spilling into new ones. But the human did not move. He did not blink. His calmness was like a shadow in the room, a silence that grew heavier with every passing moment. Some aliens began to watch him, even while they argued. His stillness unsettled them. He was not afraid. He was not impressed. He was not overwhelmed by the sight of beings who had destroyed entire civilizations. He was only observing. The councillors whispered to each other during breaks. Why had the humans chosen him? Was he a soldier, a leader, a trick? No one could decide. The human himself gave no clue. He carried no weapons, wore no medals of honor, and spoke to no one. But when his eyes met theirs, even the fiercest generals felt something they could not explain. The Drakith warlord leaned closer to his advisor, his voice low and sharp. Look at him. He thinks himself above us. The advisor tilted its head. Or perhaps he knows something we do not. The warlord scoffed, yet he did not look at the human again. As the arguments dragged on, the human finally reached into his pocket. Every eye turned to him, expecting words, perhaps a hidden weapon, maybe even a betrayal. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook and a pen. He began to write. The aliens exchanged glances. None of them could read human script, but the sight unsettled them more than any speech. He wrote calmly, slowly, as if recording every word of their shouting. He did not stop when they threatened each other. He did not stop when one empire promised to burn a star system into ash. He simply wrote, by the end of the first day, the chamber was divided. Some demanded he be removed. Others argued that if humanity had been allowed to send him, there must be a reason. A few suggested his silence was a weapon of its own, and through it all, the human never spoke. The council adjourned in chaos. Armies outside the chamber prepared for war once more. Across the galaxy, millions of soldiers waited for the signal to strike. And still, the human wrote in his little notebook, his face calm as stone. The aliens could not understand it. They had shouted, argued, and threatened with the full weight of their empires. He'd given them nothing in return, not a word, not even a sign of emotion. And yet, every leader in that chamber went to sleep that night with the same thought burning in their mind. What will happen when the human finally decides to speak? The war stretched across light years like a wound that refused to close. It had begun long before the human was even born, long before his people had even taken their first steps beyond their home system. For the elder races of the galaxy, war was not a sudden fire. It was a storm that never ended. Armies were born into it, lived in it and died in it, while new ones replaced them as if endless. The chamber of the council looked calm from the outside, floating above a peaceful blue-white star. But inside it shook with the voices of hatred. Each empire blamed another for the endless fighting. Each claimed to be the true victim, and each swore they would never kneel until their enemies were dust. The green-scaled Serax governor stood tall, his long claws clicking against the glass table. His voice was sharp and cruel. "We offered them a chance to surrender. They chose to resist. We will erase them from the stars." Opposite him, the armored Drakith warlord rose. His crimson shell gleamed under the chamber's lights. "Erase them? No, we will burn their worlds until even their ashes are forgotten." A third voice joined, deep and echoing, from a being made of living crystal. "You both speak of destruction as if it will bring peace. It will not. It will only leave silence, and silence cannot rule the galaxy." The argument spread like fire. Each representative demanded war. Each called for fleets to be unleashed, for weapons hidden in black vaults to be used at last. Some wanted to shatter suns, others to poison entire planets, still others to turn stars into traps that would swallow whole civilizations. The human listened. He did not interrupt. He did not react. His face remained calm, but his eyes tracked every speaker. His small notebook was already half filled with notes. He wrote quickly, each line smooth, as if his hand carried no fear. Some aliens grew angry at his stillness. The Serax governor slammed a claw on the table, pointing at him with fury. "Why does he sit silent? Why does he watch as if he is judge and jury? Is he a child or is he a spy?" The Drakith warlord laughed, a cruel sound. "Let him sit. His people have no fleets, no weapons worth naming. Let him record our strength. When humanity faces its first war, they will understand how weak they are." But even as the chamber roared with anger, some leaders felt an unease they could not name. The human silence weighed heavier than their words. His steady gaze unsettled them. It was as though he already knew how this war would end. Beyond the chamber walls, the galaxy burned. Fleets clashed in the void. Ships the size of mountains tore into one another, scattering debris across entire systems. Colonies were swallowed by firestorms. Soldiers on distant planets fought in endless trenches, their bodies feeding wars that had no victor. The council had gathered to stop this chaos, but every word they spoke only fed the flames. And in the middle of it all, the human wrote in his little book. A whisper spread through the chamber. Why does he write so calmly? Some believed he was only taking notes. Others feared he was recording their secrets, their weaknesses, their shame. For alien generals who trusted only in strength, the thought of being observed unsettled them more than any weapon. One of the crystal beings leaned closer to its neighbor, its voice soft. "He writes as if he knows something none of us do." The neighbor shivered, though its body was made of iron. "Perhaps he does. Or perhaps humanity has sent him to remind us of something we have forgotten." The meeting stretched for hours. Threats turned into promises of destruction. Fleets outside the chamber waited for the signal to attack. Armies on distant worlds prepared for the next slaughter. Yet the human did not flinch. When the council paused for breath, he lifted his eyes. The sudden motion froze the room. Even the loudest warlords stopped speaking. His gaze moved across the chamber, calm and heavy. He looked at each leader, each general, each emperor who had called for war. His eyes did not accuse, and yet they carried judgment. His silence was a mirror, forcing each alien to see themselves. The Seracs governor clenched his fists. "Say something, human. If you dare sit here among us, then speak." But the human said nothing. He lowered his eyes back to the page and continued writing. The silence lasted longer than any argument. The leaders who had shouted for war felt their voices falter. The Drakith warlord leaned back into his seat, his armored claws tapping nervously. The crystal beings hummed low, their tones uncertain. In the war outside, thousands were dying with every breath. Yet here, in the center of power, one man's silence held back the storm for a moment. And in that moment, every alien realized a truth they would not admit out loud. They were afraid, not of each other, not of fleets or weapons, but of what might happen when the human finally decided to speak. The chamber of the council was supposed to be a place of reason. It floated in neutral space, untouched by war, watched over by the light of a star that burned steady and calm. But the longer the meetings went on, the darker the mood inside became. Every empire shouted for victory. Every general demanded blood. Old grudges resurfaced like wounds never healed. The Seracs remembered when the Drakith burned their moons. The Drakith remembered when the crystal beings shattered their fleets at the border of a nebula. Every voice carried hate, and still the human said nothing. He filled page after page of his notebook. His face remained calm, his hand steady. No anger, no fear. Just the sound of a pen scratching against paper. At first the aliens mocked him. Then they tried to ignore him. But as days passed, his silence began to grow inside their minds. What was he writing? What did he know? At night, when the chamber emptied and the delegates returned to their private rooms, whispers spread like shadows through the corridors of the station. Some claimed the human had been sent with secret orders. Others whispered that humanity had discovered something, some hidden truth that could change the war. The Seracs governor hissed to his closest advisors. "Do you not see? He listens to everything we say. He records every plan, every weakness. Humanity means to use this against us," one of his guards asked softly. "Then why does he not speak? If he has power, why hide it?" The governor bared his teeth, his golden eyes flashing. "Because silence is his weapon." In another corner of the station, the Drakith warlord brooded. His armor clattered as he moved, each step heavy with frustration. His advisors dared not approach until he spoke first. "He looks at me as if I am a beast, as if my words are nothing." One advisor bent low. "Perhaps he knows you are right, Lord. Perhaps that is why he does not argue." "He fears your strength," the warlord did not answer. In truth, the human's calm gaze had unsettled him in ways no enemy ever had. Weapons could be broken, armies could be crushed. But the human's silence was different. It made him feel judged. It made him feel small. Elsewhere, among the crystal beings, the whispers were gentler but no less uneasy. Their voices hummed through their shining forms, soft and trembling. "Why does he write? Why does he listen so closely? He is like a mirror, showing us our own rage. Perhaps he is not here to learn from us. Perhaps he is here to teach." The idea frightened them. Across the station, the whispers twisted into rumors. Guards at the docking bays repeated stories they had overheard. Servants in the halls carried fragments of conversation. Soon, even those who had not seen the human began to speak of him. They said his silence was not weakness, but a warning. They said he was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal something terrible. They said his 3 words, when he finally spoke them, would decide the fate of the galaxy. No one knew who had started that last rumor. But once spoken, it spread quickly. 3 words, what words could they be? The alien leaders returned to the chamber, their tempers sharper, their nerves frayed. The human sat as he always did, notebook open, pen ready. And though he had not spoken a single sentence since arriving, every delegate now heard his silence as loudly as a voice. The arguments grew more violent. The Seracs called for extermination. The Dracith demanded final war. The crystals warned of mutual ruin. Voices clashed, weapons rattled, and threats of destruction echoed against the chamber walls. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Dracith warlord rose from his seat. His towering body cast a shadow across the room. His armored claws slammed onto the table, cracking its surface. His voice thundered like metal tearing apart. Enough of this waiting. We will end it now. We will burn every world of our enemies until nothing remains. The war ends only with fire. The chamber froze. The warlord's words were no longer threats. They were a promise of annihilation. Fleets across the stars would soon move at his command, and in that silence all eyes turned to the human. For the first time, he lifted his head slowly from the notebook. His calm eyes locked onto the warlord's furious gaze. He did not speak. He did not move. Yet the chamber felt colder. The Seracs governor whispered, half in fear, half in anger. He's going to say it. This is the moment. But the human did not open his mouth. He only closed the notebook. The sound of the cover snapping shut echoed louder than the warlord's roar. The chamber trembled with tension. Every leader felt their breath catch, waiting for the words that might follow, but none came. The human rested his hands on the table, calm as ever. He looked at the warlord, then at the others, and finally lowered his gaze once more. The warlord stepped back, his armor rattling. For a moment, even he could not find words. The meeting ended in confusion. The delegates left the chamber with heavy hearts and heavier questions. Outside, fleets prepared for final war, but inside, unease grew. The human had not spoken. Yet somehow, his silence had stopped the warlord's fury for a moment, and the whispers in the dark grew louder. What will happen when the human finally breaks his silence? The chamber was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavier than noise. For days, the council had argued, threatened, and shouted. But now, all voices had fallen quiet, because every eye was on the human. He had closed his notebook. That single act had shaken the room more than any weapon could. The snap of the cover had echoed like thunder, and the warlords, who had sworn to destroy entire civilizations, waited nervously. The Dracith warlord's armor gleamed red as he leaned forward, his claws curled tight. His voice cracked like metal grinding. "Speak, human. Show us your reason for sitting here, or leave and let us end this war in fire." The Seracs governor hissed, his scales rattling. "Yes, enough of silence. If you have words, then let us hear them." The human did not answer. He sat with his hands folded on the table, his calm gaze moving slowly across the chamber. One by one he looked at each leader. His eyes were steady, unblinking. No anger, no fear, only a weight that made every alien feel suddenly smaller. Whispers stirred in the corners. Guards shifted uneasily. Advisors leaned toward their masters, whispering warnings. The rumor that had spread across the station now pulsed in everyone's mind. 3 words. He will speak 3 words. But what could they be? The crystal beings hummed softly, their bodies glowing faintly in the dim light. "If he speaks with purpose," one of them murmured. Another whispered, "If he speaks, then the galaxy itself will change." The human opened his notebook again. He did not write. He only rested his hand on the page, as if holding something invisible. His eyes turned once more to the warlord, who had promised fire and death. And then at last he spoke. 3 words. His voice was not loud. It was not commanding. It was quiet, but in the silence of the chamber, it carried farther than a roar. Every delegate froze. The warlord's eyes widened. His claws shook against the table. The Seracs governor pulled back as if struck. The crystal beings dimmed their glow. Shock spread across the room. Some covered their faces. Others whispered in disbelief. A few shivered as though those simple words had pierced deeper than any blade. The Dracith warlord's voice broke uneven. You cannot mean that." The Seracs governor's golden eyes darted wildly. "If it is true, then we are all already defeated." The crystal beings hummed louder, their tones rising in fear. "He has spoken the truth. We cannot deny it. We cannot fight it." The human leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanged. He had spoken once, and that was enough. He returned his hand to the notebook, closed it slowly, and set the pen down beside it. He had no need to repeat the words. They lived now inside the minds of every being present. And in that moment something broke. Not in the human, not in the chamber walls, but in the war itself. The arguments did not continue. The threats did not rise again. Every leader sat in silence, trapped in the weight of what they had heard. Fleets that had been ready to launch their final strike now waited in hesitation. Armies prepared to march now stood still. The war had not ended with weapons. It had not ended with treaties or bargains. It had ended with 3 words from a single human. And yet the galaxy trembled. Because if those words were true, then everything they believed about power, about war, about victory was a lie. The Dracoth warlord lowered his head. His voice was heavy. Then it is over. We cannot continue. The Seracs governor hissed in denial, but his claws trembled. He wanted to speak against it, to shout, to argue, but no sound left his mouth. The truth weighed too heavily. The crystal beings sang softly, their voices carrying across the chamber. It is finished. The war is ended. The human has spoken. The human did not stand. He did not shout. He did not smile. He simply sat with his notebook closed, his silence returning like a cloak around him. His 3 words had been spoken, and nothing more was needed. Across the galaxy, fleets received the command to halt. Ships that had been seconds away from firing their final volleys powered down their weapons. Soldiers lowered their rifles in confusion as orders came to retreat. Whole armies that had prepared to die suddenly stopped moving. A silence spread, not the silence of death, but the silence of war finally ending. No one in the chamber celebrated. No one dared to cheer. They only sat, shaken by the thought that one man, one human, had undone centuries of bloodshed with nothing but 3 words. And though the war was over, a new fear took root in every heart. If one human could end a galactic war with a single sentence, what else were humans capable of? The galaxy changed in a single moment. Fleets that had been ready to destroy each other fell silent. Generals who had sharpened blades for centuries now stood frozen. Across star systems, millions waited for the order to attack, but no command came. The council chamber was still. The echo of the humans' 3 words lingered in the minds of everyone who had heard them. Words so simple that they sounded almost foolish. Yet none could deny their truth. The Dracoth warlord, who had once sworn to burn whole planets, now sat heavy in his seat, his claws trembling against the table. His armor no longer gleamed with pride, but dulled with shame. His voice, once sharp enough to cut through armies, broke as he spoke softly. He is right. We fight not for survival. We fight only to destroy. And in that destruction, we will all end together. The Seracs governor hissed, scales rippling with anger. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to scream that the war must continue. But when he looked at the human, calm and silent, the words caught in his throat. For the first time in centuries, the Seracs had no answer. The crystal beings lowered their glow. Their voices hummed in harmony, carrying sorrow but also relief. We could not see it. We believed war was the only way forward. But his words showed us another path. The human did not move. His notebook remained closed, his hands folded over it. He had spoken once, and he would not speak again. His part was finished. The council leaders sat in silence for a long time. Some lowered their heads. Others stared at the table, as if seeing for the first time the weight of their choices. None dared to look at each other, for they had all been stripped bare. Their pride, their power, their rage, none of it could stand against the truth of 3 simple words. At last, the Seracs governor broke the silence, his voice quiet and hollow. Then, the war is over. The words spread across the chamber like a wave. Not shouted, not celebrated, but accepted. The war was over, and across the stars messages were sent. Fleets powered down their weapons. Armies stood down. Soldiers who had expected to die in the coming hours now laid their rifles aside. Worlds that had lived under the shadow of destruction felt the weight lift. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy breathed. But peace did not bring joy. Not yet. Instead, it brought fear, because no one could forget what had just happened. No one could forget that all their power, all their weapons, all their endless years of hatred had been undone by a human who had only spoken 3 words. What else could humanity do? The Dracith warlord looked at the human once more. His voice was low, heavy with something between fear and respect. You have done what no empire could. You ended a war older than your own species. Tell me, human, how did you know? The human raised his eyes, calm as before. He did not answer. He did not need to. The truth was already written in every mind present. The 3 words were not magic. They were not a secret weapon. They were simple, but they carried a weight no empire had dared to admit. The words were, "We all end." That was all. 3 words that stripped away every illusion of strength. 3 words that reminded the galaxy of a truth too heavy to ignore. No matter how powerful, how ancient, or how proud, every empire would one day fall. To fight endlessly was to choose extinction. The Serac's governor lowered his head, his golden eyes dull. We all end, yes, and if we continue this path, that end will come sooner than we dream. The crystal beings glowed faintly, their voices soft. His words are not prophecy. They are reminder. We all end, but we may choose when. The Dracith warlord rose slowly, his great form heavy, as though the words had added weight to his body. Then let it be peace, not for honor, not for pride, but because we all end, and there is nothing left to gain from war. No one argued. No one raised a voice. The decision had been made, not by vote, not by threat, but by 3 words. The human stood at last. His movements were calm, unhurried. He picked up the notebook, tucked it into his coat, and turned toward the exit. The council watched him go. None stopped him. None dared to ask more. When he stepped out of the chamber, the doors closing behind him, the galaxy itself seemed to shift. Armies would return home. Worlds would begin to rebuild. The silence of peace replaced the roar of war. Yet even in peace, the fear remained. Because if one human, with no fleet and no army, could end a galactic war with 3 words, what would happen when humanity truly found its voice?